Ajá.
Henry tuvo un problema, realmente tuvo un problema de salud y no se va a poder conectar.
Ok,
¿Ok?
perfecto.
Te va a pasar la palabra seguramente Jimena al principio para que después tú hagas una introducción al tema. Me parece que es importante sí que hablemos de los temas de la división de ustedes y cómo se vincula indudablemente con el tema de ciencia, tecnología e innovación. Y bueno, después ya pasamos a los panelistas y al debate, al intercambio. Así que hay tiempo para sacar una buena dinámica de eso.
Ok, entonces voy a hablar un poquito del enfoque
Perfecto.
del impulso para la sostenibilidad.
Excelente.
Voy a hablar de los ejemplos sectoriales de los cuales
Ujú.
tenemos evidencia.
Perfecto. Incluso yo creo que esto indudablemente una de las cosas que se vincula es también con el proyecto de, digamos, lo que tiene que ver con Smart Mobility, ¿no? Todo lo que tiene que ver justamente con el tema de ciudades es otro de los ángulos interesantes, también cómo esto puede transformarse en el elemento que dinamice la inversión y la innovación.
Sí, perfecto. Entonces voy a mencionar
Recording in progress.
Muy buenos días, señoras delegadas y señores delegados. Estamos iniciando.
Good morning. We are beginning this last session of the third meeting of the Conference on Science, Innovation and Information and Communications Technologies of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC. We will now hold a panel called entitled Eco-Innovation, the Energy Transition and Sustainable Production, which will be moderated by José Luis Samaniego, who is the Chief of the Sustainable Development and Human Settlements Division of ECLAC, and who will introduce the panelists that will be accompanying us. José Luis, you have the floor. Thank you, Jimena. May you all be very welcome to today's panel on the issue of eco-innovation, the energy transition, and sustainable production. I am the director of the Sustainable Development and Human Settlements Division of ECLAC. And in our position, in our biannual position document that we published in October of last year, entitled Building a New Future, we were able to mention a way of tackling the 2030 agenda, which enables us to quantify it and to view the necessary growth rates in order to bring together the pillars of the 2030 agenda: people, prosperity, and a third pillar. What we published then is a tremendous problem that we have in our region because of the economic structure that we have in Latin America, where the rate of growth that is needed in order to close or to close the social gaps that exist in our region requires a very high growth rate, estimated at a rate of 4% per year, accompanied with an enormous redistribution effort of up to 3% of the GDP in terms of the highest, from the highest income levels to the lower income levels, and by 2030, in order to meet the objectives of the 2030 agenda in terms of eliminating poverty. But that 4% annual rate by 2030 is much higher than the rate that enables us, that is possible for us in terms of our international insertion, and therefore our development is linked, is the link between exports and imports, and how the region responds to international growth rates. Those rates are will be around 1.2 and 1.5 or 1.6% a year, very distant from that 4% that I mentioned. However, if we in addition, we take into consideration the nationally determined commitments vis-à-vis the Climatic Framework Convention and the Paris Accord. The region cannot grow beyond a level of 1.2%. And when we update those figures, considering the new national determined objectives presented in COP26, the region cannot grow more than 0.1% per year. And we have growth rates that are very different, and that with the structure that we have, we will not be able to meet that 2030 goal. The only alternative is to advance towards structural changes, creating new incentives for investment, benefiting from the opportunities that innovation and technological change are offering us, so that we can make certain sectors grow much faster, with three characteristics: more intensive, that are in the early stages of the building of the infrastructure that is required, sectors that require less imported component, or that enable us to better join the export structures to the rest of the world, or sectors that have a far smaller environmental footprint. Those are the few sectors that are at the border of technological development. Renewable energy complies with those requirements and are also far cheaper for the whole economy. The movement towards cleaner vehicles and the recycling of vehicle parts via the reconversion of internal combustion vehicles to vehicles powered by electricity. The deepening of the circular economy, the economy of care, the bioeconomy, the agro pasture and cattle raising and forestry sector, the growth of the economy of health, and all this, of course, accompanied with a perspective of closing the digital divide, leaving no one aside. The ECLAC documented the advantages in these three pillars out of these 8 different sectors that we identified. Traditionally, we're viewing changes in the technological frontier that are positioning Latin America in a with an opportunity in order to benefit from what it has in terms of renewable energy for the production of green hydrogen, where the region could play a fundamental role, and not only as an exporter of green hydrogen, but as an area where, following an adequate science and technology policy, an industrial policy, and an economic and regulatory policy that is enabling, could become a region that, in addition to, in terms of the production of hydrogen upstream, in terms of renewable energy, storage mechanisms, and the production of electrolyzers, our region could have an advantage. But likewise, in terms of the use of and applications downstream, the region could have important advantages in order to advance towards the reconversion of land transport vehicles, freight vehicles, railroads, ships for maritime transport, and the application of green hydrogen in airplanes, and to regulatory enable this and make it decisions in terms of enabling the use of hydrogen, which I am using simply as an example, in order to facilitate the emergence of a certainty for investors. Likewise, when we talk of products of the circular economy, we can apply exactly the same idea. And we can apply the same idea to the agriculture and livestock products in agroeconomy. And of course, R&D efforts should be geared towards benefiting from these opportunities that are emerging for Latin America and the Caribbean. The purpose of our panel this morning is to be able to discuss in greater depth about this situation, to discuss with the colleagues that accompany us about the opportunities, the challenges, the public policies that we should be designing in our region in order to benefit from the opportunities and face up to the challenge in terms of innovation in environmental issues, and also in terms of structural changes that at the end of the day will enable us to meet the 2030 agenda. Without further ado, then, I would like to offer the floor to our panelists, and I would like to first of all offer the floor to Armando Rodriguez Bautista, Vice Minister of Science, Technology and Environment of Cuba, who accompanies us this morning. You have 6 minutes, please, to make your comments. You have the floor, sir.
Muy bien, si no lo tenemos conectado, entonces...
Okay, if he is not connected, we'll offer the floor to Pedro Bernal Perez, who is Director of Policies and Programs of the National Council for Science, Technology and Technological Innovation, CONCITEC of Peru. Mr. Bernal, you have the floor. Thank you very much, José Luis. First of all, I would like to convey the institutional greetings of the President of the National Council for Science, Technology and Technological Innovation of Peru, Mr. Martí Corena, who has not been able to be present in this meeting, but we believe that our participation in this forum is tremendously important. With regards to what you have already commented and the issue of innovation, we fully coincide in the sense that this is an opportunity that the region has in order to achieve development, and a development, and not a development in traditional terms, but within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals, within the framework of these 3 fundamental elements that you mentioned: people, prosperity, and the planet. So a development that considers these 3 main pillars that involve people, sustainability, and the care for the planet. In Peru, as we will know, we have endless opportunities because we have a rich biodiversity, a rich biological biodiversity, cultural, and this makes our country a mega diverse country, and that is where the opportunities emerge in order to promote a development within the framework of the SDGs that you mentioned.
However, we do have challenges, and internally we need to overcome in order to promote with greater strength this path towards sustainable development. And one of them is precisely aligning public policies of science, technology, and innovation with this strategic view of sustainable development. I can tell you that at this point in time, we are going through a process of reforms of the of policies and regulatory framework that are the basis for the activities of science, technology, and innovation in Peru. And we have proposed a new policy of science. What happens when going or having a sectoral approach versus across the board or cross-sectional perspectives? We are going from promote a sectoral approach to promote textile industry, mining, agriculture as sectors, and then focus in green development. And that includes circular economy, renewable energies, biodiversity, bioeconomy, and also other strategic aspects like comprehensive health, decent housing, and digital economy. These four strategic areas that are across the board very much aligned with sustainable development is what we plan to promote and further from the new policy of science, technology, and innovation will come into force in January 1st of 2022. That is our first challenge. Adjust strategic alignment with sustainable development, and then downstream, then we have the challenge of implementation. We have many, many gaps, all of them linked to the number of researchers that can contribute to generate knowledge innovation precisely in these fields, renewable energies, electromobility, and also in healthy nutrition. We have gaps there, we need to close them and guide our efforts precisely to promote researchers that can generate the knowledge and innovation that we need. Another challenge we have is to improve infrastructure and scientific technological equipment and infrastructure for these purposes, and also improve the willingness or readiness of corporations in order to have cleaner productive processes, and at the same time generate products that may comply with these principles of circular economy, reduction of climate change impacts, and among others. Another challenge, and that I would like to highlight, it's not so much with this policy of science and technology, but rather the articulation of this policy with the industrial policy and with the regulatory framework. We know that there is interaction between the science policy and the efforts that we as countries conduct to promote the training of researchers, improving the scientific equipment, innovation in areas of sustainable development, but all of that is not enough. We need to articulate and link with the industrial policy and particularly with other sectors that also have actions designed for sustainable development. In the case of Peru, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Tourism, there are efforts there to articulate science with innovation, but at the same time with the industrial policy, with that of agriculture, with that of tourism, and have the appropriate updated regulatory framework sustaining all those activities. A few days ago, I was talking to the Commission of Science and Innovation of the Congress of the Republic. And we were saying that the regulatory framework that we don't have in Peru, I understand in other countries of the region, or rather it has been built based on certain technological paradigms. But now with emerging technologies in the area of communications or renewable energies, it is necessary that we revisit, review all these standards for them to really fulfill the role of promoting and not, as it is the case, of limiting the development of technology. So, as one first comment, I would like to stop there. That is my first comment. And then surely there will be an opportunity to go deeper into the subjects. Thank you, Mr. Bernal. Yes, there is a major challenge of coordination with all the sectors regulating different productive activities. And this is not only solved from the Science and Technology Ministry. Vice Minister of Science and Technology, Mr. Armando Rodriguez Sigma from Cuba. Thank you. Good morning on behalf of Cuba. First and foremost, thank ECLAC for the invitation and opportunity to have this exchange with panel colleagues and all the attendees connected throughout Latin America and the world. Firstly, I would like, on behalf of the minister, I would like to thank the space of SIGMA within ECLAC and ratify the commitment of Cuba with collaboration in these areas among all of our countries. I would like to ratify the fact that Cuba promotes a scientific, technological, and innovation policy that has the environment as one of its fundamental pillars. And the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Environment provides a clear message of how indispensable it is to connect policies of science, technology, and innovation with industry, technology, and protection of the environment, and also ratify the fact that for Cuba, the concept of the environment is essentially anthropocentric. So the idea is to everything we achieve in improving quality of life or social projects of our country is in the center of our policy. In places like this one, in discussions in public sessions on models of development in order to achieve sustainability, I would like to ratify the fact that although it is important, the changes, the new approaches, the implementation of the 2030 agenda with its 17 SDGs and goals, that would be the minimum line that we need to achieve. It's clear to us that it is a great, great challenge for our countries, particularly for our governments. in the framework of the pandemic. But the pandemic has been a true learning process for our governments, for public policy, not only in science, but for all public policies. In the case of Cuba, its system of science, technology, and innovation provided an opportunity led by the President of the Republic to agree on solutions and responses to the pandemic. And as a result of that, our sector of medical sciences, technology, universities, and research centers were all convened to have one face against the pandemic and bringing together a critical mass of technologies and scientists. And we were able to provide a response to the pandemic that has allowed that more than 92% of our population is immunized, vaccinated with the necessary doses, with Cuban vaccines, and that gives you an idea of our technology sovereignty we have in that area, and therefore to be shared also through solidarity, this possibility. And that has we have learned lessons in Cuba. There has been a management system based on science and collaboration, putting at the center of solutions the main problems of citizens of Cuba. And working groups have been established, scientists, technologists, researchers, and also businessmen. And there is also public-private cooperation in order to all contribute to solutions. Solutions, for example, for production of food, but also linked to how the issues of digital transformation, Cuban automation issues, and also aspects of the environment and natural resources. The pandemic has given us challenges, yes, but also opportunities for Cuba to move forward with the model of the government, with society in general, leveraging the role of public policies. And our colleague from Peru referred to the importance of the articulation of those policies. But in 2018, we had legal standards in order to strengthen the science model of Cuba, including incentives for scientific production, innovation, and in recent times also, the economic fabric has been diversified with promoting small and medium-sized companies, Cubans, and with that, the economic fabric, which is key, that needs to be innovative to have another possibility to meet the needs of the economy. And there, the management of natural resources and environment has been vital. Also, policies promoting high technology companies and universities so as to articulate knowledge with the strategic economic sectors, thus reinvigorating the economic actions of the country. In the area of innovation, we need to say that we have a 2030 plan of economic and social development where you have 6 axes, strategic axes. One is to leverage and promote more science, technology, and innovation. Another one is environment and natural resources. Therefore, it is strategic that our Ministry of Science and Technology is part, but it is led by a vice minister. And with that, we have coordination at the top level of the country for all that is environment, science, economic, financial policies. And that has also strengthened the instruments we have in Cuba insofar as the environment and what we have published in and quality of life. It is a plan of the state of Cuba facing climate change, and that plan was adopted in 2007, and we have conducted research for the dangers of climate change. No audio, sorry, connection interrupted. In order to predict, sorry, again.
Okay, Minister, we are running out of time. Well, those were the ideas that we wanted to convey to you. Cuba advances, even during the pandemic, with a strategic design where science, technology, and innovation is a fundamental pillar for the economic and social development of our country. And in this sphere, the visions of sustainable development have been strengthened, and our commitment to face up to the threats of climate change from science, technology, and innovation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Deputy Minister. A very strong example of development, the development of the Cuban vaccines and coordination between different sectors. And I would like to ask you what you're thinking about energy independence and the reconversion of your infrastructure. But we will leave that for questions. And now I would like to offer the floor to Diego Rojer, Director of Biofuels of the Energy Secretariat of the Ministry of Economic Affairs of Argentina. Mr. Rojer, please. Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to convey the apologies of Dr. Diego Hurtado for not being able to participate, and we hope to share some interesting views with you. We will try to be very precise with you, so I'll focus on energy transition. Now, with regards to this issue, I can tell you from the viewpoint of the Ministry of Science and Technology that this issue is being included among the national challenges of Science and Technology 2030, that our country is concluding a plan that we have worked with the different ministries with regards to energy transition. The primary terminal, so to speak, has been the Energy Secretariat, despite the fact that it has not only been that entity, because as you well know, the issues of energy transition involve transport, the issues of agriculture. There are also other aspects that include the Ministry of the Environment in Argentina. Now, with regards to the 2030 plan, that has already been organized with regards to energy and energy transition, and it is coordinated with the roadmap for the energy transition that Argentina has posed itself for 2030, and that it is now developing for 2050, and that is primarily based on a whole set of aspects that relate to how we build the roadmap for the energy transition in Argentina, and that in turn is based on the development, inclusion, and other requirements that our country has in terms of the natural resources that we have, the industrial, scientific, and technological capabilities that we have, and that will be required, and what we can obtain as from the decarbonization results, objectives that we have, the energy matrix that we have, and how to best articulate this with a renewable energy system, minimizing the energy costs, maximizing development opportunities, and benefiting fully from the capabilities that the country has in terms of advantages that we have in different sectors. In that sense, the basic aspects of our energy has to do with fossil fuels, electricity, and renewable energies, especially wind power. In terms of resources, Argentina and therefore our system is fairly clean compared to European countries. And gas is an important transition factor that enables replacing fossil fuels with biogas, which is important in Argentina. We're already using that in transport. I'm sorry, the speaker is having connection problems. We lost you for a few seconds, Diego. We could hear you clearly until you mentioned the important participation of gas in the transport sector. Maybe you could resume as from there. No, I think he's not connected. Can you hear me now? Yes, so we can hear you now. We heard you until you mentioned that within the energy matrix, you have the importance of the gas in the transport sector. Well, a quick way of decarbonizing transport in Argentina is a replacement of fossil fuels with gas. We also have biofuels, liquid fuels, replaced by biodiesel and bioethanol, and therefore we have an early vector in that sense. Gas is something present since the 80s in transport and has increased its share. And the geographic location, the hydroelectric resource that we have in Patagonia and wind power enables us to use the hydroelectric electricity with wind power, increasing wind power without needing to resort to storage in batteries, which is a more expensive technology. And therefore, for the transition in terms of the provision of electricity, leaving aside gas, which is the bridge, and nuclear and wind power for Argentina. And of course, there is scope for other technologies that has to do with solar power and so on. But these three elements that I mentioned at the beginning coincide with the technological capabilities that our country has and the industrial capabilities. We have national technicians for that, and part of our transition agenda is geared towards strengthening these capabilities and developing the next steps in terms of the scale up of wind power. But we also point towards new opportunities such as thermal power, which based on the capabilities that our country has in other sectors such as nuclear and fossil fuels, and can be transferred to that market. One of the main problems that has to do with the transition in terms of how replacing fossil fuels that are used in industrial production. More than 50% of the energy used by industries has to do with heat, and to replace that with electricity would imply a tremendous cost and a tremendous reinforcement in terms of infrastructure, and the use of thermal power resources has a tremendous opportunity to develop. We also understand that the development of biogas is a solution for part of thermal solar power is important, and Argentina has a space in the agenda for the development of science and technology, which is relevant, and that has to do with I'm sorry, the speaker is once again facing connection problems. And on the part of hydrogen, we have an agenda that dates back many years, working in capacity building. Well, My camera has been switched off, but if you can hear me, that's okay. Well, as I said, in terms of hydrogen, we have been working on for a long time with that in Argentina with some experimental plants that have been operating for nearly 10 years now. And recently we announced the possibility of investing in a large project for the export of green hydrogen to Europe. That is the comparative advantage that in market terms that Latin America has. And as you know, the major advantage that we have is that wind in Patagonia, that given the capacity factors that it possesses, produces an advantage in terms of costs, which is very great, very important. And therefore this natural advantage is something that we understand as a possibility for industrial technological development. Now we've lost you again. Well, it's a pity because we were discussing a very important issue, the issue of hydrogen as something that can be exported, and that now creates an opportunity cost in terms of the investment in fossil fuels. We'll see whether we can go back to Diego Rojer. And now we would like to offer the floor to Carlos Eduardo Pereira, who is the Director of Operations of the Brazilian Enterprise for Industrial Research and Innovation, EMBRAPI. Mr. Carlos Eduardo Pereira, you have the floor. Thank you very much. I'll try and speak in Portuñol, and if I'm not understood, I'll change into English because Portuguese is my mother tongue. I would like to thank you for the invitation, and I will deal with a perspective as a minister. The minister has mentioned the importance of science and technology for sustainable development, and especially with the importance of working together with academia, industry, and government. And that is basically the idea of EMBRAPI. EMBRAPI is a social organization in Brazil linked to the Ministry of Science and Technology and Innovation. And that was created 7 years ago and has a similar model to the one that Frau Rojer has in Germany, or Catapult in England. And the idea is to conduct cooperative projects with academia and industry in order to resolve problems, innovating processes, solutions. And it is interesting because what we do, if we look at the portfolio of projects that we have, the increasing trend of having projects in the themes that were mentioned here with involving sustainable solutions, green technologies, clean technologies, circular economy, renewable energies. And therefore, the idea is, or the importance behind this is that an opportunity arises, and it is shown that with a government investment, bringing together and hand in hand with academia, we can establish innovating solutions that can be exported. Somebody mentioned green hydrogen as a possible technology, and we have projects with the area of health, for example, for remote operations, medical equipment, that for countries of continental dimensions is extremely important and necessary, and that became acquired greater importance during the pandemic. And the policy that EMBRAPI has is that we have a network. We're presently 76 units throughout Brazil. And we already have projects with around 1,000 different companies, over 1,500 different projects. And as I mentioned, the projects that are extremely interesting in terms of benefiting from waste, mineral waste, in order to produce circular economy products such as fertilizers, to use that in civil construction projects, renewable energy projects. And this is an interesting perspective because indeed we turn a challenge into an opportunity. And that is a characteristic that we find in the case of Brazil. If we look at the ranking of scientific production, Brazil is among the 15 top producers, normally in 12th or 13th place. And if you look at the innovation rankings, we are far below that level. And therefore, the challenge is how to change knowledge, or to make knowledge contribute to innovating solutions. And therefore, this involves a tremendous opportunity, such as digital transformation and other areas. We have a lot of support in Brazil in order to be transformed. And this means that processes are transformed into cleaner processes and more effective processes. And the 4.0 industry, the concept of thinking how to develop processes that are not only much more automated, but include people in a much in an important manner, benefiting from more inclusive characteristics, for example, involving people with special needs that can be incorporated with through the use of equipment that support people. The issue of intelligent and sustainable cities is also important, and they have an interesting characteristic in terms of infrastructure, water, the rational use of water, the rational use of traffic, the emission of the use, the redesign of vehicle emissions, and that opens up the possibility for establishing cooperation among countries. We have signed many international cooperation agreements, and what is most interesting is that is with developed countries such as Europe, and I believe that Latin America and the Caribbean could benefit to develop joint projects, because we have many similarities and many problems that are common to us all. And what is interesting is that the success of projects, because it involves not only the participation of industry, but projects following the Embrapi model, financing is not only with public resources, and that is a problem that we have to tackle. It is not only public resources that will fund innovation, we have to attract private investment as well.
In our case, we have 2 billion reales in projects where close to 50% comes from industry. So something that at the beginning, it was a challenge that was tried. And with this, you have companies presenting relevant problems where academia gets involved in those projects. And it's interesting that the impact in academia is also important insofar as scientific production, where innovation and they can work together and they are not incompatible. And an important result we had is that BNDES, the National Development Bank of Brazil, has signed cooperation with Embrapi a month ago to invest as 170 million reais in projects like of circular economy and green hydrogen, and precisely using the model that is shown with great success to develop new projects very much aligned with the Sustainable Development Agenda. And it's interesting that those projects provide more than 6,000 employments, jobs. And with that, these are indirect employments. And so the idea I wanted to highlight is how science and technology is so important in a way that we can find practical solutions. So not only can we provide internal solutions for countries, but also solutions can be globalized insofar as competencies we have and opportunities to make the most of them. That's my first intervention, and later on we can keep on discussing. Thank you, Mr. Pereira. Very interesting, another model of development with society. And now I give the floor to Mónica Luz, international expert in eco-innovation and sustainability. Mrs. Luz, go ahead. Hi, hello everyone. First, to thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel meeting that addresses three interesting subjects: sustainable production, transition towards more sustainable energies, and eco-innovation. These are interesting, they are complex, but the three of them lead in one single direction, that is moving towards sustainable development. We cannot advance in sustainable production without eco-innovation. That eco-innovation that will allow us to develop new technologies, greener technologies, and at the same time advancing towards energy transition based on ever more renewable energies. So in this context, I would like to place on the table the lack of information there is in the region on these subjects. Why is it important to have information available? Because although in all countries, the idea is to promote these three topics through public policies in order to have a correct formulation of public policies. Well, we need information to know what is happening, not only to formulate public policies, but also to evaluate them. If those policies are really accomplishing results, or if we need to modify them. Therefore, we need information. And also to give the idea of transparency for all citizens. So this situation of lack of basic information, and it is a fact in all the countries of the region, this is a true challenge when moving forward. Now, problems linked to a lack of information is different depending on the country. In some, there is no information. In others, yes, there is information, but it's not available. And in other countries, the information is not sufficiently disaggregated. Therefore, it's not useful. It's not disaggregated. Why? Because it doesn't provide information about the different activity sectors. It doesn't provide information in order to compare the companies in terms of sizes. It's not the same to address eco-innovation in large companies versus SMEs, and versus or one geographic area versus another. It's not the same thing. And in Brazil, recently, the innovation FinTech survey was developed where there is a small module on eco-innovation. And there you could see the great difference between eco-innovation carried out by major companies, large percentage, 60% of them, versus that innovation of SMEs, which is only 30%. If we speak about business eco-innovation, we don't have sufficient information of what is happening inside each one of these sectors. In the data I provided, it's especially about manufacturing companies. Why isn't there any information? Because these three themes we are addressing, they are complex. So there's not one appropriate methodology to do the measurement. ECLAC has conducted important efforts along these lines. It has developed a methodology for measuring sustainable production in the manufacturing sector, for example. And this is a project where many countries of the region participated, and the technicians of the countries demand training in these methodologies and thus be able to advance in these measurements. Another problem in order to move forward in measuring these three realities is, as you said before, they are multidisciplinary. There are different institutions involved, and what's most normal is that there is a lack of coordination among the different agencies or associations. It's necessary to move ahead because in order to improve coordination among institutions, and with that you can release financial resources or save financial resources that are necessary in order to advance or to measure these three facts or these three situations. Another important point would be the commitment of institutions. From the business standpoint, one of the largest difficulties when they try to advance in sustainable production and wants to invest in eco-innovation, well, one of the problems is that you need a long-term commitment. The policies that are undertaken, I mean, the businessman needs to understand that these policies will be sustainable in time or will continue in time, either policies or support, because the business community has to make an important investment and will not invest if you don't have that certainty. Also, at the same time, it's important to say that all the companies can move forward in green production. You don't need to be a major corporation to develop modifications for productive processes and become a greener company, or also improve in production of renewable energies at a smaller scale. Now, as to eco-innovation, I would also like to point out that related to these comments on the Foundation for Public Policies, the survey I talked about, the one of Brazil, the companies expressed that one of the factors they didn't take into account when implementing eco-innovation, one of the least considered aspects was this lack of institutional support for them, the governmental support, as well as the requirements to meet certain targets were less relevant to adapt or adopt activities related to eco-innovation. I simply put on the table this idea that at industrial level, at the level of companies, they need help discussing the mechanisms and financial resources at legislative or other means. But to do it appropriately, different countries should also display efforts in order to know deeper and more specifically those realities, obtain information that is key for policy formulation and for compliance with them.
Señor Samaniego, está muteado.
Ay, muchas gracias por avisar, grave error.
Oh, what a big mistake. Thank you. We do have time for a second round. So I will raise a common question and a different one for Mrs. Luz, where in these three subjects, eco-innovation, energy transition, and sustainable production, we perceive a problem as ECLAC of articulation between supply and demand. It is a chicken or the egg. There may be stimuli, there may be regulations, but if there is no certainty allowing to articulate both sides, it's impossible. So the question for you is going to be, how can we provide certainty to that a supply that is non-existent today with a demand that is non-existent or almost existing? And for the colleagues that spoke from national standpoints, my question is, we've seen that we have medium-term plans where border issues are being considered, for example, 2030 agenda, energy transition, like the case of Argentina, the case of Peru, and Brazil is capable to respond to demands of sectors involved for specific solutions, but has an interesting different model to articulate the different sectors. If we are working on similar subjects, if we all have medium-term horizons, if we are addressing similar challenges, housing, health, digitalization, energy transition, we have spoken little of mobility except for gas. Well, wouldn't flatten the learning curve an intensification in regional cooperation, for example, would be key to have regional cooperation for vaccines. We have countries in Latin America and the Caribbean where vaccination rates are very low still, where it has been complicated, and there is a mandate from ECLAC even to gain a health autonomy that would involve a regional production of vaccines. So the question for each one, wouldn't it facilitate to tread this path in different technology areas to have greater regional cooperation, or are there barriers for regional cooperation? So first, Peru, 3 or 4 minutes.
Undoubtedly, despite the fact that each country promotes sustainable development in terms of public policies that it designs, there are areas where this comes together and which are fundamental. And they are aimed at what you said, the need to intensify cooperation within the region in order to make progress or to advance towards sustainable development within the Sustainable Development Goals. I would very quickly like to highlight 4 spheres where collaboration and cooperation could play a fundamental role. First of all, when it comes to the development of activities that promote the exchange of experiences, for example, different successful companies in each country that have developed sustainable business models or are developing green technologies in a successful fashion. And what is interesting to acknowledge here is that despite the fact that Monica highlighted something that is very important, and that is to guarantee the sustainability of policies and reduce uncertainties, we must also recognize that these new demands on companies in order to gear their production towards sustainable processes implies in many cases an investment that they do not have, and in other cases implies a reduction of their profits. And then therefore it's very important to get to know the experience of other countries, the experience of companies in other countries, so that we can indeed encourage other companies to follow suit. Now, with regards to the issue of research applicable in similar contexts, the region has common challenges in terms of sustainable development, and it is necessary, I believe, to create a platform for the joint development of research projects aimed at resolving those common challenges that we all face. The issue of vaccines, for example, as mentioned by Armando, is something evident now as a result of the pandemic, and likewise there are a whole series of other issues that do not belong to a single country but to the region as a whole, so to speak. And what Monica also said in terms of developing a platform to exchange information and upload information is vital for the development of better public policies, and especially for their evaluation. And finally, to establish comparative analysis, regulations and rules that facilitate this type of production. What I mentioned at the beginning, the regulations in our countries have often been constructed based on old technological paradigms, and we need to review that, make adjustments and changes, and therefore it would be important for cooperation to be geared towards the exchange of experiences about regulatory frameworks that enable the promotion of green innovation or the eco-innovation in our countries. And those are some elements of cooperation that I believe could be a starting point for, as Jose Luis says, to enhance cooperation far more in our region. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Bernal from Peru. That's a curious piece of information. In some countries, reconverted vehicles are forbidden. In other countries, hydrogen, for example, does not form part of the, continues to be a chemical substance and is no longer a fuel, just to talk about the different regulations that exist in our country. Vice Minister of Cuba, Armando Rodriguez, please, you have the floor. Thank you very much, and I thank all our panelists for motivating us with their interventions. I would like to also thank you for your question, because I believe that one of the fundamental challenges that we have, and not only in order to define the problem, I believe that we have enough diagnosis, but of course, we need to get to know each other much more to detect the potentials that exist. But within each country, there is a wide-ranging knowledge about the main weaknesses and strengths that we have. And I would like to highlight that we're talking at the end of the day about the technological gaps that we have, and that prevent us from gaining access to technological solutions that enable us to make progress in fulfilling these objectives. Now, with regards to the lessons, whilst there is an opportunity to learn from something that was done elsewhere as a solution, I believe that is fundamental, because the institutional experience takes many years in our countries and in our peoples. We cannot afford to lose that amount of time if we're able to learn from other countries, from other regions, from other institutional frameworks. And that is why in Cuba, we are promoting space for the articulation of policies and for the articulation of learnings and the promotion of good practices. Recently, we have established a National Innovation Council presided by the President of the Republic, where we share novel ideas and good innovation practices that transcend the entrepreneurial realm, the academia, and government, and become a part of society as a part of its culture. And I'd like to mention an example. It was mentioned that Cuban technology is successful because we have a vaccine, but we took that to the Innovation Council. We took the experience of how we incorporate innovation in this sector, not to talk about vaccines, but how we link the health sector with the entrepreneurial sector, with the realm of clinical trials, which is very important. And those are the ideas that we try to promote based on the pandemic. And what we have done at the national level, we believe could be very useful at a regional level, because we can all contribute to that, at the evaluation of public policies, the generation of indicators in order to measure public policies. There is, again, a tremendous experience in countries in the region and institutions that have conducted evaluations for a long time that could help us, because if we face a common goal, that is the goal of minimizing uncertainties, which minimizing risks to manage innovation. Normally, there is a threshold of limitations to innovations, and I believe that that confidence is part of the challenges that we face, and it's not only a country challenge, but a challenge for the region as a whole. And here, I would like to talk about the internationalization of science. It's very difficult to talk about that and to comment with our innovation and academic structures if there is no platform behind that. Always in order to achieve major things within the realm of communications, the political platform helps enormously. And coinciding with our Peruvian colleague in terms of the challenges of regulations, regulations become barriers, technical barriers to trade, but also technical barriers in many cases for the development of national sectors, for the development of sectors for which it is very difficult to gain access in order to be hand in hand with the present knowledge agenda. And therefore, The idea is to promote that proximity. And finally, we need good governance. The challenges have enabled us to have a governance of science, technology, and innovation, which is very clearly articulated with all the other governances that coexist in the nation. And I believe that there is a framework there in terms of lessons and interconnections that we must establish within our countries. Today, this is very fashionable, but in a frank process of promotion of innovation, national innovation, systems, but we must also talk about regional innovation systems. And perhaps we could establish for ourselves a regional innovation system that recognizes our strength and provides us with greater vigor in order to deal with the development of innovation and of our countries based on that type of technology and technological sovereignty. That is something that we must continue to discuss in spaces such as these. Thank you very much, Vice Minister. We'll now offer the floor to Diego Rojer from Argentina, from the Ministry of the Economy of Argentina. Thank you. I coincide with the need for cooperation. The scope of the question is enormous, so I'll refer to the scope of development possibilities from the viewpoint of paradigms that advance towards an energy system based on renewables. One of the challenges that will change is the concept of energy security. To think of security as the provision of energy is a system which involves intermittent energies. And looking at this at a regional level, that leads us to think that if we mention this in terms of subcontinent in South America, the issue of energy security, we would have a lot to offer in terms of cooperation possibilities, because it would enable an energy mix that requires cooperation, and that would require common infrastructure, but also a continental roadmap for transition. Based on these two assumptions, so one could define at the level of subcontinent a roadmap, a technological roadmap in terms of the strategic technologies that should be that we should have at the level of South America in order to manage this transition and in order to maximize the objectives of development, employment, and lower energy costs, and at the same time a roadmap for cooperation around these issues, and that would enable the need to have a cooperation with regards to strategic natural resources needed for the transition: lithium, copper, uranium, and rare earth, which will be strategic elements in order to guarantee security, in the sense that we will move on to a regime dominated by energy flows that will have to be managed as from major investments in technology dominated by stocks that are located in territorial terms. In consequence, those are the major challenges in order to uphold a policy of cooperation in science and technology, energy development, and so on. Perhaps the most important one is in the development of regional financing, because I have seen many transition models and reviewed that with colleagues from different ministries. And in all cases, for example, in the case of Argentina, the need that we require that transition is unsustainable in economic terms if there is no direct foreign investment. And therefore, if there is no coordination at the Latin American level, it is very possible that those roadmaps will not coincide with macroeconomic aspects. And in this sense, the efforts in terms of R&D, the development of industrial champions, for example, at the level of South America, with regards strategic technologies and the provision of strategic natural resources, and to benefit from all this is, I believe, fundamental in order to establish a successful roadmap. We have some history in this, the cooperation between Argentina and Brazil in terms of nuclear energy. The Agency for Mutual Control is a good example of how, and I'm speaking personally here, at a personal level, how a good example of how this provides possibilities for a roadmap of nuclear capabilities that we require for the transition, because there is complementary aspects, the capabilities for enrichment on the part of Brazil, and likewise a long roadmap that shows that this is a peaceful development or a development for peaceful uses, and therefore this development, I think, makes a lot of sense. And at the same time, what also makes a lot of sense is the positive impacts that this has upon employment, access to new areas of knowledge that are fundamental for the development of renewables. For example, the management of materials at high temperatures, which is fundamental for solar thermal power, where we have similar knowledge that is required for nuclear power and so on. I could speak all day about this, but this is where I would like to end. Fantastic. I believe that each intervention is adding elements to a very interesting program for regional cooperation. Mr. Pereira from Brazil, I would just like to comment that what I discussed beforehand focused on at a micro level, but in Brazil we also have the National Innovation Program, pluriannual programs in the environmental sector. But I focused in my intervention on projects. Undoubtedly, regional cooperation, I believe, is fundamental in several senses, as mentioned by other panelists. The exchange of experiences, the lessons learned, are fundamental. We have countries that face many similar challenges, both to know the successful experiences and likewise the issues, the problems. When we simply if we don't only need to exchange the good results, but also the problems that we faced, that's sometimes much more interesting. We also need to know much more in detail the initiatives to understand what is actually happening in Brazil, in Peru and Cuba, to identify synergies and increase cooperation. And we speak a lot about co-creation, co-innovation, co-development. But I don't think we're doing much in our region. We're not doing many things together, and co-creation is important because it helps to reduce what we like, because we don't have to this doesn't have to be completely funded by one single country, but through collaboration.
A problem, as I mentioned, is regulatory harmonization instead of being a barrier. For example, for evaluation of public policy, so as to consider and compare effects and impacts. If you don't do an evaluation, it will be empty. I mean, you cannot have feedback then that can make you improve and modify those policies. Something that's very interesting is the word collaboration of startups and SMEs. For example, regional cooperation there could allow for startups, technology and environmental startups that have emerged in different countries could implement and collaborate, creating markets even for exports. So I think I see different advantages that can be obtained from regional cooperation. Yes, we would love to participate more intensely in those initiatives. Thank you, Mrs. Luz. You're muted. You're mute. Unmute your microphone. Regarding your question at micro level, how can we act from the supply and demand side? How can we make a company in any of the countries of Latin America to launch towards the production, green production? Given my experience in the region, there is a lack of information for business community, capacity building, because in many cases, the business community try to adopt measures for advancing in green production, but they are not aware what that is all about. Perhaps capacity building or training is information that has to reach out to the businessmen. And that should be done through the chambers of commerce, through national institutions. how can we move the, in what other way can we move the companies? Yes, through legislations or public policies, but not punitive with, the typical legislation, but rather not the typical one, but rather addressing other instruments like fiscal incentives or subventions that have been very useful in promoting renewable energies. And through the creation of best practices, codes, these tools also have been successful or have had a very positive impacts in different areas. Indeed, it is important through platform creations like the one mentioned by Brazil, where to have cooperation between academia, the businesses, and financing sources so that the businessmen may have access to that financing source. Usually they lack that. And all this within a context of publicity. In some cases, the business community do not know about the existence of those sources, nor what steps must be taken in order to obtain that help. And sometimes also informing the citizen as a consumer, final consumer of all these products that will result from sustainable production. In fact, there are several mechanisms to act on supply and demand. And the key is that give or promote these mechanisms, publicize these mechanisms, and bring it closer to the companies where usually they don't reach out those measures. Thank you very much. I thank our panel members. I thank you. All the ideas expressed here, we as ECLAC, and particularly that's my case, and this I will discuss with my colleagues of productive development, the fact of having platforms with comparative regulation to create or have a regional cooperation in some technologies, the idea of innovating with regional financing, championships, and even joint developments. All of these subjects are very attractive. Some years ago, when we discussed about science and technology, we mainly focused on digital gap and advances there. I think today this panel is a snapshot of the region and showing us that there are many fields of technology or innovation that are key for cultural change, to reduce the footprint, to diversify our economies in a road that we could go more firmly ahead to meet the 2030 agenda. I thank you again. We have a task now to reflect and think, to flatten out these curves of learning curves and try to improve the quality of development for our populations, for our economies. So once again, thank you very much and have a good afternoon, good day to all of you. Thank you, José Luis Samaniego. Thank you to the panel members participating in this session. Now, and according to our agenda, as contemplated before, we will proceed to the adoption of agreements. Firstly, we will announce the countries, members of ECLAC, that will accompany Argentina in the vice presidency. We have received the expressions for the executive committee in the Council of Science, Technology, Innovation for the period 2021-2023. So I will read the list of countries that will be vice presidents accompanying the Republic of Argentina. Colleagues of please could you show? So Argentina is accompanied in vice presidencies by Costa Rica, Guatemala, Peru, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Also, now we will submit to approval the agreements of this conference of science, technology, information. If you allow me, also Mexico is vice president. So presidency is Argentina and vice presidencies are Costa Rica, Guatemala, Peru, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Now we will proceed to approval of the agreements, and we have circulated in December the draft agreements and declarations of Buenos Aires. Countries were asked to approve this. Participating governments have had the opportunity to make comments and incorporate text until December 13th at 5 p.m. We have circulated one final version, that is the one that you have. So we would like to submit to the consideration of delegations for the approval, and if there are comments, if there are no comments, then we declare approved the Declaration of Buenos Aires. If any delegation would like to make a comment on the approval, please express your wish raising your virtual hand or in the chat. As there are no requests, then we approve the Declaration of Buenos Aires. It's then approved. Now, as a way to close this third conference, we will move on to the Roundtable of International Cooperation and Regional Integration. I will ask the colleagues, are we ready to do that? The roundtable is at 1 o'clock. So we will ask the participating delegations, please do not disconnect at 13 hours or 1 o'clock. We resume so as to move to this final roundtable that we have entitled International Cooperation and Regional Integration. Please come back at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, and now with the Buenos Aires Declaration now approved and the new executive committee of the conference and presided by Argentina, we're now going to move on to the closing session of the conference with the Roundtable on International Cooperation and Regional Integration. And I invite Álvaro Calderón from Productive and Business Development of ECLAC to present our panelists and moderate this segment. Go ahead. Thank you very much, Jimena. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you. But first of all, I would like to apologize on behalf of Mario Cemoli, our Deputy Executive Secretary, who had committed his participation in this session, but an unscheduled a last-minute emergency has prevented him from attending. I am Fernando Alderón from the Division of Innovation and New Technology at ECLAC, and I will be with you during this session. I would like to welcome and express my gratitude to the outstanding panelists who are with us this afternoon to talk about a topic that is particularly relevant in the current conjuncture and the theme that convenes us: science, innovation, and technology. I hope that this will be an open exchange on what is happening and a way of strengthening cooperation among countries of the region, but also of our nations with other countries of the world, especially those who have strong leadership in terms of science, knowledge, technology, and innovation. In this session, we are accompanied by Diego Hurtado, Secretary for Planning and Policies on Science, Technology, and Innovation of the Ministry of Science, Technology, and Innovation of Argentina. Mark Litvine, Senior Expert from the Directorate General for the EU. Efraín Guadarrama, Director General for American Regional Organizations of Mechanism of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. And we thank Efraín very much because he has a dual hat on this occasion, as he is representing Mexico, but also he, in his capacity as Chair Pro Tempore of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC. We are awaiting the session to be joined by Paola Vega, Minister of Science, Innovation, Technology, and Telecommunications of Costa Rica, and Armstrong Alexis, Deputy Secretary General of the CARICOM. And while we wait, I would like to say that over the last 3 days, we've had space for reflection, very intense, and we've been able to talk about very relevant aspects with regard to how to strengthen, drive forwards both institutions and policies that lie behind science, technology, and innovation in Latin America. We have seen in detail various of the different areas where these themes are of particular relevance to Latin America, and especially in the current conjuncture of COVID-19. We've seen themes linked to digital technology, sustainable production, themes of various relevance, and that have enabled us to move forward in our joint work with more than 80 participants and more than 15 countries attending the meeting. We also have some messages that fill us with concern, because it has been unveiled that the global asymmetries with regard to access to science, technology, and innovation are particularly complex for Latin America, since the region has STI systems in general underfinanced and concentrated in basic research and applied with major gaps to experimental development. So it is necessary to renew the strategic role of STIs. This cannot be seen as a component isolated from other areas of concern of governments, but on the contrary must be at the heart. In a scene of structural weakness, short resources, in order to achieve outcomes, we need to move ahead with a strategy that assigns resources to those areas of knowledge related to the main challenges that the countries of Latin America face. It is necessary to prioritize support for experimental R&D to move ahead with solutions to specific challenges, not ignoring the development of more general science. For this, the Buenos Aires Declaration has posed a biannual program of activities that will be organized based on two specific objectives. One, to strengthen public institutionality to support the development of STI, improve the connection between STI policies to the strategic challenges of the region, and drive forward regional and international cooperation in these matters. And this has to do precisely with the roundtable that we're holding now. With regard to this, I think it is necessary to strengthen the links between research and productive development and promote the development of productive capacities. The national scales in most of our countries are insufficient, and the regional space has a scale and the productive capacities to supplement this and have more sophisticated products and more knowledge intensive. It is necessary to further space for dialogue and exchange, but among government authorities, universities, research centers, and the productive sector in order to identify concrete actions to support the development of science, technology, and innovation, and the same as the exchange of knowledge in areas and disciplines that are strategic in order to enhance the development of human capital in the region and generate more and better jobs. However, local efforts are insufficient. It is necessary to strengthen international networks for scientific and technological cooperation to promote the creation of STI in countries of the region is key, same as strengthening mechanisms for the technology transfer. And this must be accompanied by the design of new mechanisms to take ownership of knowledge. And we realize that the operation of patent systems should be rethought, taking into account the barriers in terms of capacities of the countries of the region. Cooperation and partnerships at international level will be essential in order to move ahead in strengthening institutionality of our innovation systems and to position our discussions on equitable access to science and technology in these multilateral spaces. And we are convinced that this is the time to act and have important changes, and that what we're able to move ahead in the next 2 years will determine substantively the direction taken by science and technology and innovation policies in the region. And with this short introduction, I would like to share with you some of the elements that I would like to talk about in coming minutes, and that you may give us your viewpoints with regard to the spaces where it is necessary to strengthen these mechanisms for cooperation among countries of the region and other world economies, as I was saying, with emphasis on some of the more developed economies. In that sense, the presence of Mark in this panel is of particular relevance, since he will be able to tell us a little about the channels, programs, and initiatives that they have in the EU for this. But I would like to begin with Secretary Hurtado, so that he may tell us, as the host country of the conference, which are your viewpoints, the emphasis on which Argentina would like to place its priorities for the coming 2 years, and how we may strengthen these collaboration channels. Diego, good afternoon, and the floor is yours. Thank you, Alvaro. How many minutes do I have? How many would you recommend? Well, 10 minutes, and then we can have a second round. Fine, that's more than sufficient. Thank you. And well, thank you very much for that introduction. I once again greet everyone and thank you for this opportunity. I would like to use these 10 minutes to make a few comments on the report presented by ECLAC to this meeting. I was reading it these days in Science and Innovation for Development in Latin America and the Caribbean. For us, and what ECLAC says is a benchmark. The conceptual theoretical frameworks that we use, for example, to draft the 2030 plan is anchored in the conceptualization made by ECLAC of the region. So some comments on to the report. Well, one of the traits we who work with these topics have recognized for decades, and I'm not exaggerating, I could even say half a century, is the imbalance in the production of knowledge in our countries towards basic science. And this has been very much studied in the region. Its direction is on the supply side. That is scarce a connection to the economic reality. And also we could say a lack of capacities in order to detect management capacities to draft policies for science and technology in order to detect the demands of a country project, territorial demands, productive demands, strategic demands. And in that sense, my first comment, I believe, is that one approach that today is becoming global and that we believe is appropriate for the region is the policy approach guided by mission. We understand that this globalized approach should be mediated by the socioeconomic realities of the region, but with a careful theoretical, conceptual, empirical work of mediating the concept of policies guided by mission that assigns a very important leadership and coordinating role of a business approach to the state, and that this conception is today appropriate to what Latin America needs and to encourage collaboration at a regional level in regard to science and technology.
Unify this type of approach would be important. Second comment I would like to make relates to the scarcity of private investment, always speaking in relative terms about OECD, EU, United States, or China. This is another of the traits that the report from ECLAC emphasizes. In Argentina, we are reacting. This is also a characteristic that we detected several decades ago. In Argentina, there were many attempts to revert. Some favor in terms of accompanying the national government, and sometimes sectorial attempts in general, when they were not accompanied by public policies, failed. That deals with generating incentives to attract private investment towards the activities in R&D. Argentina has some interesting experiences that I could rate as successful, as for example, what we call sectoral Argentinian funds, something that we started applying in Argentina in 2010. And today we have very interesting cases of private-public partnerships where the private investment in R&D played an outstanding role in stimulating development and future marketing. I'm summarizing developments at a pilot scale, scale-ups, learning processes, accumulation of capacities, etc. But today we need to put this in the case of just cases. This is not a public policy that could allow us to advance towards what we could call structural change of the productive matrix. We still are at the stage of exploration, where there are some instruments that we would like to improve and multiply, because we understand that there is an interesting experience there. Then in our country, we have very recent laws that tend to promote private investment, the law of promotion of the economy of knowledge of the Ministry of Productive Development, complemented by the law of gradual increase in investment in R&D, which puts a goal of 1% by 2032. We're talking about public investment, even though it might be modest. In the next 10 years, this year will go from 0.28 to 0.32. We had 4 poor years of disinvestment, science and technology until 2019. The pandemic maintained that regression. From 2021 onwards, we're once again recovering investment in science and technology, now accompanied by a law of increments of spending. Why do we need that law? Because it makes public investment foreseeable from now to the coming 10 years. So when we set the goal of public investment of 1% by 2032, we understand that if we do things right, and there's foreseeability accompanied by the law of promotion of the economy of knowledge, and adequate instruments, such as I was commenting about the sectoral Argentina funds, that would allow us to think that by 2032, we could have an investment of 2% approximately, thinking of 1% public and 1% private. It's still unbalanced, the public investment 50-50 as compared to the central countries, but yet being able to make equivalent public and private investment seems important to us. And from the standpoint of the current administration in Argentina, the state should continue to have a major role, which we consider very positive. I'm in minute 6. Intellectual property rights, you have to be very careful. I'd like to say cautious in understanding the real causes behind the lack of capacity of having patents in our country and the excess of patents by the non-residents. When in Latin America, we start promoting the patenting or the protection of IPR with the main strategy, which is the patent, we have to understand that Latin America in the decade of the 90s is not promoting the promotion of intellectual property rights or the development of companies of national capitals, but allow me to say it, how to put it in a way that's not very academic. It's an imposition what happens in Latin America. Patenting, it's just to promote foreign investment in our countries. So if we want to improve the patent standards, we need to advance into our economies with less influence of the foreign capital, generate more national industries, and the points that I've been touching configure a whole. Each one of these points that I've been mentioning are absolutely intertwined. There is a Minister, Paola Vega. Hello, Paola. We've been meeting several times in panels. It's a pleasure to see you again. Another characteristic, I'm finishing, mentioned by ECLAC's report, institutional instability, or it says weakness of the institutionality of Latin America. All these measures that I've been mentioning, not measures, but characteristics that I've been mentioning, and mentioning some possible solutions, we understand are fundamental for our institutions to become more stable. Clearly, the stability of STI policies in the country have as a root the economic and political instability. This deals with the alternance of progressive governments with those of a more liberal or neoliberal orientation. Neoliberalism in Latin America has a predatory presence who doesn't want to invest the investment in STI, but it goes in the opposite direction. If we need stability for science and technology, we need to improve the protection of intellectual property. We need private investment. We need stability. And to that end, we need governments who understand the importance of maintaining state policies. The governments who come with ideas of refunding the nation and interrupting the cycles of growth and stability tend to be the governments that bring with them neoliberal perspectives that usually deindustrialize. The last case in Argentina, 2019-2020, in Argentina, 20,000 SMEs were lost. This investment in science was brutal, and technological projects that were strategic were dismantled. So I end up by saying experiences such as the Latin American Caribbean Space Agency today ongoing, a process where Mexico and Argentina, since we have a colleague of Mexico, I'm mentioning this, Mexico adopted a role of leadership that we value significantly. We understand that it can be just a case. There's few cases that we can showcase in Latin America of successful regional multilateral cooperation in strategic sectors. The ALCE project may be one of these projects so necessary for a region. This is ongoing today. I simply wanted to mention it. The process of global energy transition for Latin America presents a unique opportunity for cooperation, the search of complementarity, and the understanding at the regional scale that energy transition needs to be a vector of industrialization, of technological policies, and not only an energy policy. Thank you very much. I conclude here. Thank you so much for your words, Secretary Hurtado. The true diagnosis that you have given us of the Latin American reality reveals the weaknesses we have in our region as to science, technology, and innovation, but it also gives us a path where we need to strengthen these capacities, the institutionality that underpins it, and how to elaborate, build, and design better instruments that will actually allow us to leverage this dimension, which is instrumental for the development of our countries. You also gave several references to possible forms of international cooperation, because, as was said in the beginning, our countries, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, are large countries, but most of the countries of the region have domestic markets which are not sufficient for the generation of scientific technological capabilities that will allow them to approach the strategic challenges they face. So cooperation, what you have done with Costa Rica these days of establishing cooperation agreements among the ministries. These are paths that go in that direction. And I would like to take the opportunity or to give the floor now to Minister Paola Vega from Costa Rica, so she can tell us about her experience in terms of how we can strengthen and make these channels of communication and communication amongst our countries more dynamic and richer, as well as our relations with countries outside the region to strengthen our national innovation systems and our capacities to generate knowledge in our countries. Thank you very much. A warm greeting to everyone. First of all, we have seen that the most successful experiences have occurred when, apart from identification, there's common interest, closeness, exchange of experiences, and we can also say the initial stages of identification of good practices in a country, good practices in the other, and being able to learn from each other, to see how we complement each other and what things we're already strong. And from there, we have had a good focus with many countries when small things are generated in partnership, even though they are small, but at least to start that teamwork and that involvement of the different stakeholders. For example, universities, research groups, to facilitate that closeness amongst partners. And there we start generating this, not only the interest of the policymakers in public policy, but we also need to identify those persons who on a day-to-day basis will actually give life to these partnerships, enterprises, incubators, agencies, etc. And these first works that sometimes don't even relate to funding, they may start with a way of how do we support each other to improve something? We can learn from each other. That has led us to a point where it's possible to generate that trust and the team, that knowledge, where what has happened is that subsequently this has been materialized in a memorandum where, since we already identified those points that we'd like to carry forward and also the available opportunities, so we can sign things that are more concrete, and it is like a reinforcement of that commitment. We see that we have a potential. Now we want to make this joint work systematic and give it sustainability in a longer term. That approach has made it easier because, as I said, it's not just the interest of groups that try to convince, quote unquote, the authorities. No, authorities who may have a vision of trying to convince the relevant stakeholders of the system for them to participate, but it's an interest that was built jointly. And where the actions we will undertake directly have a direct impact and benefit and goes hand in hand with the needs of those who will be carrying forward this cooperation. Their opinion is very important so that whatever we do jointly really will cater to the needs of each of the countries. And those have been our best experiences. Definitely promote the exchange of specialists and short visits of the different teams. We've done it at the researcher level, but I'm saying, why not do it at the level of the teams, of the ministries and the agencies? that can also facilitate our achieving that observation of the culture of the system from the inside, more hands-on experience. And of course, it facilitates a greater amount of relationships. We could even say stronger relationships with more time of conversation. It doesn't have to be long, it may be short things, but definitely generates in the different teams a feeling of belonging to the initiative.
Taking ownership of the initiative. So this makes it much easier so that you can continue over time because there is greater empathy. And also, I have been able to identify the people who are on one side and the other somehow aligned with this in the same line of thought in these bilateral teams, because this is an effort that we can make, and it makes it easier if it's not only within the framework of meetings held every so often, but that also when we get to those meetings, basically it is to make decisions, the following strategic decisions, but the execution as such may be carried out in a far more regular basis, jointly. Right now, we are having some difficulties for this to be regular, but there could be very short face-to-face meetings in order to carry out some initiatives among teams and the sectors that we're interested in. Thank you very much, Paola. Truly, I believe that what you say is very important, being able to exchange experiences, good practices, the possibility to exchange researchers, but also you mentioned one aspect that is interesting. The systems for the exchange of experiences should involve of officers and different people linked to science, technology, and innovation. I would now like to recognize Mark Ivrin from the EU to tell us how in Europe, with such a major strategic partner for Latin America, how do you see the role of STI, and how would it be possible to deepen and improve these channels for cooperation that already exist today in many relevant spheres between Europe, particularly through the European Commission, and Latin America? Thank you, Mark. Well, thank you, Alvaro. I would like to, first of all, apologize on behalf of our director, Yolita Butke-Vicien, who had a last-minute engagement and was unable to attend this panel, which is so relevant to us. I think that these themes that we're addressing right now and our presence at this panel is proof in itself that we are not alone as a region, and we cannot be alone at the time of addressing challenges so great as the ones that we face today and will also need to face tomorrow. And in the next few minutes, I will speak a little more about the digital sector, because digitalization is key to the development of innovation and science today, where few work in isolation in their laboratories. In fact, this is a common understanding that we have with Latin America. After Leo 2020 focused on digital transformation, many different aspects, such as science and technology and others. However, Today, international cooperation or international partnership faces a multidimensional challenge, as there are many fields of work that are all necessary. Digital capacities, infrastructure, innovation networks, business networks, all of this to overcome the challenges that we face today. It is relevant to know, and I share the opinion expressed by Diego Hurtado, in that it is necessary to reboost research and development. For us, the role of the European Union was key to increasing our capacities thanks to the single digital market, which has been a catalyzer in order to increase the possibilities of cooperation among networks, among countries, and have a common approach to the win-win compact. Also key has been regulation to break part of the puzzle that we're in. We are convinced of the need to increase innovation. We can do it in different ways. It is important to increase collaboration among various fields. It is also important to bring the private sector to work with us, because we need to research, and in economy, for example, the private sector has a key role to play. So this collaboration with the private sector opens up new space for collaboration that we could widen and increase and collaborate in this way with Latin America and the Caribbean, and also attract additional investment to the area. We are aware that we are a relevant player in economic terms in the region, both in terms of trade as well as investment. That is obvious, but also there is a direct tie between innovation capacities and foreign direct investment, or FDI, in these countries. This link also exists with human capital. We should not forget education and what we call the skills. And also, there is a direct link with the level of living of the population in these countries, so that these investments may be productive. We know, and experience has shown, that exchanging knowledge and technology is effective in order to reduce productivity and innovation gaps. And we think that we should work together in order to open up all bridges possible in order to attract this FDI and create these bridges for collaboration. If we're talking about the digital theme, that is my area, when we work with Latin America, we can see that 72% of the population does have access to broadband. That's marvelous. That is quite significant. And it does increase year by year, but only 26% of enterprises use it as a way for R&D. And this is something that where we could make an effort. It's not just a matter of results or skills or income. There is an asymmetry there between those who do not have the skills for the digital world in order to use them. In fact, I would like to repeat the EU commitment. The EU is committed to continue building what we call this common area for research and innovation between Latin America and the Caribbean and us, to foster international cooperation between the both sides of the Atlantic. This is the core of our effort to build, well, ambitious associations. Since time immemorial, we have traveled a fairly long way, and we could do more. Just to speak of Vega, the famous Vega program that creates connectivity between Europe and Latin America through a digital direct submarine cable. We have almost 15,000 research and innovation centers connected this way. And this is a tremendous potential for transformation. In addition to that, these 15,000 centers represent 65 million people that may connect. I'm not saying they are already connected. We still have some way to go to create that need to connect. Connectivity is definitely a key factor in exchanging knowledge for innovation. Well, a live example of our belief in this regard is this new vision. And Alicia Bárcena surely mentioned the Global Gateway, which is sustainable connectivity, reliable connectivity, representing people, and that is at the service of people and the planet. Latin America and the Caribbean is a key partner for us in terms of the gateway. And this is a way for us to jointly face the challenges in the digital area. We have a view that I believe we share in terms of a modern digital area that evolves exponentially year by year, and where the human being is at the center of what we do. And that is very important. The well-being of people must be at the heart of our decisions and the innovations that benefit the human being. Yesterday, and I thank everyone who was with us for their participation, such as ECLAC, the governments of Mexico, Costa Rica, and others, at the launch of what we called the Latin America and Caribbean section for the D for development, or the H for hope. This is the first step to what we want to launch in future, which is a major digital alliance that would allow catalyzing, increasing all efforts for innovation and research, have a win-win situation with the efforts made every year. We believe that these are alliances that involve the governments, yes, but also the private sector, and between the governments and the private sector, with a common objective for exchange and development of our capacities on each side. This must be connected to evident investment in all themes. We believe that in the future, we will have men and women entrepreneurs who will develop capacities, startups, or help, or large companies that will connect in what we call the great area of a common investment in Latin America and the Caribbean and the European Union. So thank you very much for giving me the floor. Well, thank you very much, Mark. Very interesting. I believe that you have made evident this strategic relationship between Latin America and Europe, and where the various initiatives carried out by Europe, particularly in the sphere of what is digital, such as enabling technology, of so many initiatives or efforts that allow strengthening knowledge, innovation, and technology are of particular relevance.
Europe has regional presence of importance. The European companies have an outstanding position in Latin America and many activities, and they are a channel of knowledge for the productive entrepreneurial sector of the region, and strengthening those channels through links with the local companies, particularly the smaller companies, will no doubt help for this historical relationship of a win-win, as you've called it, can continue to be developed and strengthened. I would now like to give the floor to Armstrong Alex, Deputy Secretary General of CARICOM, so that he can tell us from the Caribbean perspective, where and how do they see the spaces that exist to collaborate and to strengthen regional integration and regional cooperation in the area of science, technology, and innovation. Armstrong, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, for inviting the CARICOM Secretariat to be a part of today's discussions. I would like to commence by thanking the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean for the opportunity granted to CARICOM to contribute to this discussion on the role of science and technology and innovation in a sustainable and resilient recovery from COVID-19 at this time. I underscore that the need for global solidarity and international cooperation is greater than ever, and call on the international community to become more engaged in bridging the gap of inequity of access to basic infrastructure of growth in the STEM sector. If the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us anything, it is that human development issues cannot be satisfactorily addressed by privileging some over others. If we are to tackle advancement of the human potential, it has to be done by providing equitable access as a universal social good. I therefore thank ECLAC for placing innovation for development on the front burner of regional development. The Caribbean Community Secretariat applauds your efforts and commits to playing its part to ensure broad access as we work collectively to transform our region. Chair, the recent assessments suggest that we are likely to fall short of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And for us in the Caribbean community, significant investment is required in order to build a broad platform of knowledge advancement to underpin the agenda of sustainable development. Therefore, there is a clear role for science, technology, and innovation in the recovery of developing countries, such as those in the CARICOM region. As the CARICOM Secretariat, we commit to inclusive, people-centered solutions And we're moving in this direction of prioritizing science, technology, and innovation, thereby ensuring an inclusive digital future, which will guide policymaking, resource allocation, and international cooperation. Within the Secretariat, we have invested in ICT for Development initiative to treat ICT as a cross-cutting principle across all the aspects of the services we provide internally to the Secretariat and the services we provide to our member states. We have, however, to secure sustained funding, we need, however, to secure sustained funding for research and innovation, and greater effort needs to be made to collaborate with other CARICOM regional institutions, especially the University of the West Indies and other research institutes across the Caribbean community in order to take full advantage of opportunities related to science, technology, and innovation. We recognize that policies which support and engender the mindset changes amongst our people and the countries of CARICOM need time and space to leverage better real-time granular data and new opportunities to fully embrace digitalization. But equally, we are confident that with the appropriate partnerships, CARICOM member states will pursue a path that embraces science, technology, research, and innovation as a common factor of development. Given that the Caribbean community is home to one of the world's youngest populations, we possess the most basic and fundamental ingredients for promoting science, innovation, information, and communication technologies. Across the Caribbean, we possess a solid infrastructure of telecommunications, and with the private sector, we hope to expand the space of and the capacity for our citizens to take advantage of the evolving opportunities. Through the ECLAC networks and coupled with the desire to liberalize technology in the Caribbean region, we anticipate that there will be greater advantages for our development discourse moving forward. This forum is a perfect opportunity to call for targeted focused attention to be paid to STI development in all developing countries, especially the small island developing states, such as the CARICOM countries that we represent. I wish to recommend, therefore, that the STI platform, which is part of the technology facilitation mechanism, be designed to have preparatory or sub-regional meetings before the annual multi-stakeholder forum of science, technology, and innovation for the SDGs, which is scheduled for the 5th to 6th of May 2022. This would allow for meetings, consolidation of positions, and the identification of key priorities. Our countries cannot leapfrog into this new future without the right conversations and the right allies. And we wish to design new technology transfer models and opportunities that will flip the existing technology paradigm, which sees us as consumers and not producers of technology. And given the fact that we have a young population in the Caribbean, we do believe that we can provide such support. I therefore wish to volunteer a CARICOM, that the CARICOM countries will work together to host or chair the first sub-regional meeting in 2022 on how we move to a tangible innovation for cooperation. The meeting could include large and developed countries, which will act as development partners in helping the countries move forward and enter into cooperation agreements, not only with policies which assist in an expansion over the past decade, but with real funds, living labs, and other practical shows of assistance, which can engage our citizenry from young to old. I take this opportunity, Chair, to once again congratulate ECLAC for the tremendous work that it is undertaking in the area of science and technology. And I wish once again to pledge CARICOM support moving forward to ensure that the people of this region benefit not only from the discussions taking place, but also from the practical implementation of ideas, and to ensure that innovation underguides every aspect of the development of our Caribbean region. I thank you.
Muchas gracias, Armstrong. Le agradezco mucho sus palabras. Creo que
Thank you so much, Armstrong. I'm so grateful for your words, and I believe that they reflect the closeness that exists between the different states, regardless of the size of their characteristics, in terms of the relevance and how central science, technology, and innovation are in the future and the present and future agenda to approach the global challenges that condition our present. Undoubtedly, the countries of the Caribbean face particularly complex challenges. And if we can advance in capacity building at a scientific and technological area that will permit you to approach those issues appropriately, no doubt from ECLAC, we will try to contribute to that end. To continue, I would like to give the floor to Efraín Guadarrama from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Mexico. I would like to give special thanks to Efraín. Through Mexico's leadership and his position as pro tempore Secretariat of CELAC, we had important progress in the area of sanitary self-sufficiency, a dimension which is particularly important in our current times. And as I said, Mexico has had a very important role. This is a very clear example, a specific example of intergovernmental cooperation worthy of being highlighted. Efraín, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Alvaro. Yes, it's actually two topics that I would like to touch now in this very brief presentation. These are two of the most important projects these 2 years of the pro tempore Secretariat of CELAC that Mexico is holding. The first of them, as you say, is the issue of the vaccines, which is fundamentally based on this plan of sanitary self-sufficiency designed by CELAC. It is composed by 7 pillars of action, where one of them is precisely the promotion of the development of vaccines, taking as an example a very important project that we developed with Argentina, which is the production of the AstraZeneca vaccine. It was a production that I will not say was an easy process. It was a partnership with civil society, with private initiatives, where the capacities of both our countries came together, because Argentina produces the active ingredient, and here in Mexico, we do the present, which is fill and finish, which is the bottling of the vaccines, which is also a very complex process that takes around 40% of the whole production process of the vaccines. So this was a great example of cooperation, collaboration between 2 countries with the purpose of meeting the demand of a product which was the #1 priority of all our governments and all our region.
We also realize that Latin America is an extremely dependent region on imports from other parts of the world. And not only Latin America, if 5 countries, well, counting India, China, Russia, the UK and US would have relied on vaccines, our entire region would be sunk in the health crisis. And so, well, in all this, ECLAC was a great ally, and we devised this health crisis plan linked to another initiative that we also had within the framework of CELAC. And that was the meeting of Latin American vaccines for COVID-19 that held at the start of the year. And since we were seeing how vaccines were coming out, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, but we were not clear as to which of the vaccines that we were making in Latin America. And after a mapping with the help of all countries of the region, we realized that at that time, we had 13 vaccine projects ongoing in the region, and mainly Cuba with 5 vaccines already approved, in Mexico 4 vaccines in the process, in Argentina 1, Chile another, and another 2. And so this data is of a few months back, so probably this has already changed. But the important thing is that in Latin America, we do have innovation centers. We have world-class scientists, and that our governments are obliged to support them so as not to be depending on other regions of the world. And precisely, this health of sufficiency plan seeks to strengthen our production facilities, so to produce vaccines so that any further health crisis may not find Latin America so unprotected and unable to respond. So this has been something very, very relevant that we have furthered with CELAC. And the other thing mentioned by the Secretary is our regional space agency. This initiative came about after a virtual meeting held in June last year. And when we brought together the space agencies of the region. And at this meeting, one of the most important conclusions of all our space agencies, that right now in the region there are 10 agencies, is that it may be possible to have an international agency to join our efforts, our capacities, and our comparative advantages in this regard, so that Latin America may have, say, a certain regional weight in the global scenario in terms of space. We have major agencies in the region, the Brazilian one, the Argentine one, but without a doubt, for us to be there and for others to pay heed to us at a global level, we needed to work together. We needed to join technology. And so after this meeting of space agencies, we began first our big ally, and this was Argentina. We signed a declaration to determine our political will to join efforts, and then other countries joined, and we began negotiating this constructive agreement for the regional agency that began last September in the 6th CELAC summit to sign the agreement. At the moment, is in the process of being ratified by the 18 congresses of its member states that signed. And yesterday, we had the first coordination meeting of the countries that signed the constitutional agreement. And there were important results. First, the formation of a follow-up group to be updated constantly of the space achievements, our ambitions, and the direction that we would like to go with our regional agency. Second, a very important partnership with the European Space Agency and the EU, for this regional agency to be a very important player in the Copernicus program, Galileo program, and all Earth observation. The European Space Agency will establish a geospatial observation center in Panama, and will set up an information center in Santiago de Chile. And definitely our regional space agency must be part of that. And so we were very grateful for the invitation by our colleagues of the European Union for this. And the third thing that was done yesterday is that we presented the first project for cooperation that we are carrying out within the framework of the regional agency, and that is to establish a geospatial observation center at the University of West Indies in the Trinidad and Tobago campus. This is a project that is exclusively financed by the government of Mexico, and that we would like to have the collaboration of all other countries of the region, so that the Caribbean countries may also have access to these technologies. Satellite observation and all these technologies, information by satellite images, will allow the countries of the Greater Caribbean may have further information for their decision-making regarding public policy. This, of course, will also benefit the region. It will benefit the populations, and that the government of Mexico, as a chair of CELAC, is prepared to further. The slogan, the motto is innovation and development, and that is what we have tried to further in the region. And in these circumstances, so complex of the pandemic, and so well, here I am at your service for any comment or doubt. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Efraín. I think that with those two examples have shown first that in Latin America, there are capacities. Maybe in some cases they were not very visible, but the capacities are there, they exist. The innovation centers are available. There are scientists, world-class scientists who are working in Latin America and that have very relevant work being done on the forefront of knowledge, but it is necessary to connect them better, and so that they may be at the service of the great challenges that Latin America faces today. And the theme of vaccines and health self-sufficiency will also strengthen precisely these capacities, and will help prepare the region in case of new health emergencies that may arise in future, for the region to be better prepared. And also, well, we may have further challenges in future, and we must be prepared for that. And then, with regard to space, I believe that there is a very interesting room and capacities. On the one hand, this connects the role that Europe has played in this theme, the role of the European Commission, the European Space Agency, and also the effort made by Mexico to support countries of the Caribbean with satellite observation. This is essential to countries that are extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. And with this observation, they will be far better prepared to move ahead in this direction and face this sort of difficulty. In this sense, I would now like to have a second round with all participants and ask you to tell us very briefly, where do you believe there is room for collaboration? The most significant one in terms of STI in the near future, at regional level and also with strategic partners from outside the region. Diego, please. What is your opinion in this regard? Very well, thank you, Alvaro. I will try and be brief. I think it was mentioned not only today, but also throughout this event in different sessions. Digital transformation, a key area in the region. In Argentina, what we are calling the National Plan for STI 2030, and this considers 3 missions. One, necessarily linked to human resources. We have an alarming shortage at all levels, and so we're thinking that one mission of our policy, that is what we call one of our major national challenges, is capacity building, training in ICTs and STI, training and university education in different spheres at the various levels of employment. And we at the Ministry of Science, we have what we call the Manuel Sados Foundation, who was a real, very important figure in Argentina, a secretary for science in the 80s. And at the time, he was very concerned with the introduction of digital technology. The Sadowski Foundation today is the institutional vector that our ministry uses. But we're thinking of also creating a national IT institute to develop capacities and in advanced capacities. The second mission for us is digital government, e-government. And we talk of digital inclusion, community networks, IT networks, and also smart public services. And lastly, the digital transformation of the productive sector as another area. There we're thinking of applying AI to productive processes and what we call the extensionism of digital technology links more to the SME sector and what in Argentina we call people's production related to co-ops, what we call the social enterprises. Another core that I would like to speak of for us, and it's another challenge. I didn't mention it at the last time, and that's why I would like to mention now. And this is the energy transition. This is a tremendous area for regional collaboration to work supplementing each other at industrial level as well as a scientific and technological policy level. And there we're thinking of 2 missions. No, 3 missions. One linked to what we could call renewable energy, clean energy, accessible energy. And there, particularly in Argentina, we are working on detecting where Argentina has its greatest industrial capacities, its greater potential in order to accompany or, so to speak, build a medium to long-term pathway. I believe that this is essential to our region. We need to understand is not an environmental debtor. On the contrary, it is an environmental creditor. And so this presupposes bearing in mind the temporality that our transition requires, temporalities with which we must think our energy transition at a regional level. What's at play at here is an emergency linked to this transition, yes, but we understand that that urgency should fall on those countries that were responsible for global warming. This does not mean to say that our country should not take steps towards decarbonization, but in fact, the countries of the region are taking on important responsibilities, commitments, but however, it is not the same. It should not be identical, the response given to global warming by the advanced economies, that in a certain sense are those that benefited from what today we understand as climate change. And so in that sense, decarbonization in Latin America must be devised with its own temporality. And I said one mission linked to renewable energy and another linked to the efficient use, rational use of energy. And there, once again, we're seeing the world of technology, digital technology.
And finally, allow me to mention a third core of energy transition that we call the popular transition related to the whole world of the SMEs, of the cooperatives, of the community needs. Or maybe the strategy should be different from what we understand as energy transition for the productive sector. Argentina, Chile, and Bolivia in particular, these three countries form part of the lithium triangle. Well, 70% of the lithium reserves are found at a global scale. And as Latin American countries, we have the challenge of thinking of value chains. And this is happening in Bolivia and Chile. Argentina is lagging a bit behind, but we're concerned about starting to generate a policy, a strategic policy for lithium. There's a possibility of discriminating where we can be competitive and where it's not worthwhile competing. Same thing we could say with hydrogen. If I may jump from 3 countries to the whole region, here we have an area of cooperation which is huge. Obviously, I'm not mentioning the health sector because it was implicit throughout the event. The pandemic forced us to improve and to stimulate the collaboration strategies at a regional level. And I believe that we have many initiatives to show virtuous initiatives with this emergency forced us to catalyze collaboration policies. These are the 3 main points I wanted to mention. We talked about the space-centered area that could be a 4th nucleus. When we think about a regional scale, we can think of sustainable development, we can think of the oceans. But I believe that the most important 4 are the ones that I mentioned. Thank you. Thank you very much, Diego. Actually, the 3 main themes that you mentioned, digital transformation, energy transition, and sanitary self-sufficiency are at the core of the discussion. These are topics that we analyze in great depth in the different sessions of the conference. And no doubt, it's the big challenge of Latin America to build up domestic, regional capacity building, and through cooperation, generating links with those economies that are at the frontier of knowledge to accelerate the process of adoption, incorporation of these technologies at the different levels. And I believe that, just as you mentioned, there are levels of absorption of technologies that go from the large corporations, the government, up to the more popular sectors, the SMEs, that need a different perspective because they are different players with different conditions and capacities, very unequal, which need a special approach. I would like to give the floor to Paola Vega so that she can give us her thoughts of how from Costa Rica you visualize the main areas where international cooperation and regional cooperation could be strengthened. Paola, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I would say that in the issue of digitalization is fundamental. And there's many areas for joint work. I believe it could be interesting that as a region, we should think about ways to strengthen digital literacy. Look at those competencies, those common skills that we would like to see in the persons in our region. I believe it is important also thinking in the interest of showing ourselves as a region which is digitally literate, but also a region that presents a series of competitive windows, which would also facilitate joint work at the level of commercial enterprises. In the region, when we talk about opening branches of other companies in a region to establish operations, we can reach this if we define not only strategies, but if we adopt a type of standard to identify the level of maturity of the digital literacy in the persons. Just imagine that as a region, we could say in our countries, we have this amount of persons who are digitally literate according to such and such a standard and such a level. Just imagine. On the other hand, a digital transformation teams, there is an important work to do related to this. We can talk about interoperability, cybersecurity. Cybersecurity, of course, requires much cooperation, which already does exist, but it can be strengthened to ensure that our region may be cyber secure. But also when we talk about interoperability, I believe it's a good opportunity that we have to attain a good exchange. When we talk about migration, commercial processes, and the recognition of degrees and titles, it's very related to the facility of the mobility of the specialized staff in science and technology amongst all our countries, as well as the possible common marketing and development of products. So there is an interesting field there, an aspect of digital transformation that we should be thinking of targeting together. Of course, processes related to sustainability and the economy. The economy, we have many opportunities. And health, of course, it's a universal topic. It's self-explanatory, but I would target digital transformation, basically. Thank you, Minister. I see that there is great coincidence with Secretary Hurtado insofar as the priorities that must be pursued and strengthened. I believe that the European Union becomes a fundamental strategic partner. And many of the activities that Mark mentioned in his first intervention go along those lines. Strengthening the strategic partnership between Europe and Latin America and the digital arena, for example, in the area of airspace issues, etc., but fundamentally in the digital issue. Mark, what can you tell us about how we can continue to strengthen the strategic relationship and how the countries of the region can make the best use of this possibility that Europe has opened for them in this arena. Thank you very much, Alvaro. First, as you said, I believe something important is security. There's many capacities in Latin America and the Caribbean, many. That is why this cable that is the cable that we have financed jointly. And I would like to highlight that this is a common project between Europe and Latin America. In particular, Brazil. Brazil is at the very base of this proposal. I believe that at a sectorial level, we are along the same lines, digitalization. And beware, digitalization is not an objective in itself. It's also an instrument for the rest. But the planet in which we live seems to be getting smaller, even though the pandemic does not allow us to travel. But it's one, it's not two. What one country does affects what another country does in terms of the planet. And it is a shared responsibility to resolve this phenomenon that we have not perceived on a timely basis. There is an issue that's close to my heart, is the issue of the SMEs. We know that an SME doesn't always have the same competitiveness than a large corporation. In Europe, an SME has 60% of the competitiveness of a large company. Nevertheless, we have been working with ECLAC quite a bit in this topic together. When we see that in Latin America, an SME has less than 10% of the competitiveness of a large company, that tells me that there's room, a very large room for improvement, innovation, and work to do. Particularly the issue of the informal sector. It should be taken into account to see how these SMEs can access innovation. Innovation is not only to develop research capacity. It is also sharing knowledge with others. And that is very important. And that's partly the objective of the Global Gateway. The Global Gateway is infrastructure, but it is also the knowledge, sharing that knowledge between both sides of the Atlantic, how to share these innovations. And I believe that the joint development of a global gateway between Europe and Latin America will be key for both regions and the development of their capacities. Thank you. Thank you. Totally agree with what you say. A global gateway is an instrument and a channel of great importance precisely to share knowledge that can help the capacities that exist in Latin America to be strengthened, become more dynamic, and that they may seep down towards weaker sectors. I believe that your mention to the SMEs is fundamental, particularly coming from Europe, as you say, an economy which is strongly based on small and medium-sized companies that are extremely efficient and productive, which are the very basis for the welfare states and the European economies that Latin America no doubt has to look up with great interest. I would like to give the floor now to Armstrong from CARICOM so that he can give us his thoughts from the perspective of the countries from the Caribbean. How and when do you visualize that these central priorities are for the Caribbean countries insofar as science, technology, and innovation for the coming years?
Armstrong. Parece que nos abandonó.
It seems that Armstrong is not here, so we will move on to Efrain for him to tell us. Efrain, he is not connected either. Well, we are at closing time as well, so maybe we could close the conference. But before closing, I would like to pass the floor to Diego Hurtado as the representative of Argentina, our new chair of the Conference on Science, Innovation, and ICTs, and that we face major challenges in coming years. And we have a lot of work to do together, and that you can count on ECLAC support so that we may continue to work in a coordinated manner. And I would like to take the opportunity also to thank Paola Vega, who is the Minister of Science, Innovation, Technology, and Telecommunications of Costa Rica, for her work, a very relevant pillar during these very difficult last 2 years. So, Diego, please. Thank you. I will try and be very brief. Well, let me begin by thanking Paola and Costa Rica. Through her, we will be working a lot on this together. A minister came to the Ministry of Science the other day. She was with our minister, and for our ministry, our country, the truth is it is an honor to chair this conference on science, innovation, and ICTs. As we saw at this event, the challenge is tremendous. The last year and a half has truly been very difficult. For me, I find it so difficult to speak of the theme, to speak of the windows of opportunity that were opened by the pandemic, because the pandemic was a tragedy, yes, but I would say that we are obliged to think of all the lessons in the midst of this tragedy, the positive things that this has left us with us. They are there at regional level. Our colleague from Mexico mentioned Argentine-Mexican collaboration for the production of the AstraZeneca vaccine. I assure you that that experience was very, very interesting. We've held many meetings, bilateral, regional meetings in the sphere of the WHO, also PAHO, and we exchanged experiences as to how each country was considering their strategy to face the pandemic. Strategy was health, production, science, and technology. And the learning at these multilateral meetings were very great. And today, fortunately, although we should not be complacent, the pandemic is still here, but we're beginning to have a hopeful horizon. and we can maybe soon start talking about the post-pandemic period. I don't know if I'm talking too early, because in Argentina, where the figures are also rising a little bit. But hopefully, in this next stage, Latin America can learn from everything that we've learned during the last 2 years with our shortcomings in terms of science, technology, and we need to definitively overcome our weaknesses in terms of our collaboration policies, industrial and science and technology as well, because this would strengthen us with regard to trade. We've made many attempts to collaborate in the sphere of science and technology. We do have some experiences, some successful experiences, and we need to be able to multiply those experiences. And it was said by several colleagues here in Latin America, and Mark said it also. There are important capacities in Latin America. We understand that what we're missing is the ability to coordinate all this. CELAC, Mercosur, these are the right forums in our view. And so that we're hoping, although Argentina is taking up the baton, this proposal made by ECLAC, we do need to work associatively with other countries at a regional level. And so we will, of course, be trying to dynamize, devising agendas and see if we can make this qualitative leap ahead. And so once again, I thank ECLAC and everyone here. Thank you, Diego. Well, I would merely like to thank all attendants, not only those who are present in this last session, but everyone who was present over the last 3 days' work. I think that we can look forward to a very long working agenda ahead. We have already scheduled for the month of January a first meeting to determine how the working agenda, what it will be, what activities we will carry out, and we will share it with the various members of the Latin American and Caribbean community so that they may be with us moving ahead on these themes that have convened us on this occasion. So thank you very much. A warm embrace to everyone. I thank you for taking part, and from ECLAC, a very warm embrace at a distance. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped.